Hi there, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's APMG webinar, a quick guide to Agile change management. It's Mark Constable here. I'm with the APMG team in the UK, and I'm delighted to be joined by a regular APMG webinar presenter, Melanie Franklin. A number of you may well have attended previous webinars with Melanie, but for the benefit of those that haven't and maybe aren't familiar, Melanie's an experienced projects, program and change management practitioner, author, trainer and consultant, who's recently launched the Continuous Change community on LinkedIn, which I would thoroughly recommend joining if you're involved in change management. So a bit about today's session. With the pace of change ever increasing and indeed accelerated by challenges brought on by the pandemic, it's more important than ever for practitioners to equip themselves with the latest thinking, methods and tools to thrive. And that's why Melanie will be taking us through the key aspects, background and benefits of an agile approach to change. Before Melanie gets into the detail, bear with me a few more moments while I cover a few logistics for the session. So the first point is the session is being recorded, and everyone that's registered will receive a follow-up email from us tomorrow as soon as the recording and slides are online. Secondly, you should see an option on your GoToWebinar control panel to submit questions. Feel free to do that at any point, and we will trying to address as many as we can towards the end, and it's quite an interactive session, so Melanie will be wanting your input in a couple of areas, so do use the question function for that when we get to that as well. Something that isn't on the screen but do look out for, actually it will come straight after this intro, actually is a poll just to find out a bit more about our audience. And last but not least, we welcome any feedback, as that's really helpful when it comes to planning and delivering webinars in the future. And just one more point as well, just with the current situation, it's probably no surprise to learn that we're, both myself and Melanie are working from home. So we hope there are no connection issues, but we'll attempt to get back up online as soon as possible if there are. But yeah, just bear with us, please, just in case there are any issues. Okay,
I'm more worried about Labrador interruption issues more than anything.
Great stuff. I think that's the scene set. So welcome, Melanie. Thank you for being with us again, and over to you.
Right, Mark's going to put a poll up in front of you just because I want to get to know a little bit about you. And it's not an intrusive question, it's just where you're spending your time in terms of what you do for an organisation. So just click on one of the options. I can't see the poll, but Mark can, and then he'll tell me what the results are. So
yeah, thanks, Bel. It's on the screen now for everyone. See the votes coming in. So yeah, just what best describes your current role? Is it change manager or similar, project manager or similar, or neither of the above? We've got over 80% already. So Mel, we've got 46% change manager or similar, 32% project manager or similar, and it's kind of flicking 22-23% neither of the above.
Okay. So you're probably somewhere in some kind of business as usual role, line management role there. So that's what I'm going to interpret from those 22%. As Mark said, I'm going to get you to do some work today because I'm going to post some questions for you. But let's get started. So what on earth is Agile change management? That's the first thing I think we'll go for. So really what Agile change is doing is bringing together the project activities that create the tangible change. So anything where we're creating something new. So we might create, we might be procuring and wanting to implement a new system. We might be doing an organizational redesign, or we might have a new product or service that we want to launch for our customers. We're going to go through a simple process of, researching and designing, developing it, testing it and getting it ready. Whether we do that in an agile form or whether we do that in a more traditional project management approach doesn't matter. Whether it's, in other words, whether we deliver it incrementally or whether we deliver it as one thing, we know always that in order to realise benefits, we're going to have to go through the change activities. So it is essential that the worlds of project and change are combined, because the value for the business only occurs when there's a shift in how things are done. Project outputs don't realise benefits on their own. They have to be used, and old ways of working have to be stopped for us to realise the benefits. So it is not good enough just to put something in front of somebody. We've got to help them through in terms of change management. And so it's that combination of both the project activities, whether it's a new app or whether it's a new production line, combined with getting people to think through, well, how am I going to use this? How is this going to change how I work? How does this change how success is measured for my role? Are there new policies and standards that we have to apply? And of course, are there new attitudes? Are there new values and behaviours that I actually have to go through? So the first thing is, and the reason that this is so important, is that for agile change, if we're being agile, what we want to do is we want to get things into operational use. We want to make a difference. So what we're going to be doing incrementally, but we're going to be doing it, is making sure that we don't just create things, but that we actually shift the way that people work. So that's the key thing, bringing these two together for a purpose. The purpose is that we are making a difference. We are creating new capability for our organisation. We are shifting how things are done to be more efficient, perhaps, more streamlined, more relevant because they're innovative. But whatever it is, we're bringing together both the project and the change activities because we're making a difference. The next thing to say is that agile change refers to the incremental nature. The agile in agile change really does mean incremental. And it's the thing is the traditional approach where we've got our current ways of working and we want to move to some new vision, some new end goal. Well, that traditional approach comes with a lot of risks. And I think organisations have had a sharp learning curve on some of those risks in the last year or so. The first is that there's a risk that the end goal is no longer relevant because it's been overtaken by changes in circumstances, both outside the organisation. We've all been there with the push to knowledge workers becoming remote workers in organisations across the globe. We understand what COVID has done to our working practices. We know that we've had massive redundancy programmes as a result of COVID. Organisations don't have businesses anymore to run, so they are stopping certain services. We understand that there's a risk that, you know, this ideal end goal that we thought of a year ago is now something completely different. There's also, though, in the traditional approach, I think, the risk that by spending time perfecting the solution and getting every single thing that you could possibly want developed and included in the solution, and therefore the time frame is much longer, the danger is you go quiet. You go quiet in front of your clients. And in a very crowded marketplace, when lots of your competitors are out there all the time innovating and drip feeding things into the customers, drip feeding things into the market, by going quiet and not launching something because you don't want to launch something only partially finished is the argument I hear a lot, that it's not quite good enough. I mean, I had this conversation earlier this week and it just felt like it was 10 years ago, but these people had very strongly held beliefs that they had to perfect everything before they could go live. And the risk that really resonated with them once I brought it to their attention was this risk of going silent, though. You don't do anything for your customers for 15 months because you're perfecting the right answer, whereas competitors are out there every few months launching new products and services. And that's why you're losing business. The penny finally dropped with them. And I also think there's the internal risk that over time, if the end goal is too far into the distance, there's the risk that the money or the sponsorship or both will run out before there is any kind of return on investment. We know how quickly executives are replaced if they are not seen to be performing. So if we dangle an end goal 18 months, 2 years away, there's a good chance the person sponsoring that initiative won't be around to reap the rewards of it. And that also creates a funding crisis for us because the funding gets terminated before the job gets done. Whereas, of course, what we're doing here with our agile approach is that we're getting in an early return on investment. It might not be everything, but there is a workable solution or part of a solution that we can put into working order straight away, and then we can get that return on investment. So that's the other concept. The agile change is to address those risks of the traditional approach by getting straight in there with something that will make a difference. And the other thing I think core to Agile change is that Agile in Agile change refers to the flexibility. The agility is the flexibility in responding to changing circumstances. The changing circumstances mean that the end goal needs to flex. We've just talked about the danger of sort of sticking with an end goal that might become obsolete or irrelevant over time. Far better that we have a mechanism which accepts that as the norm, because that's how it feels in the 21st century, and actually instead takes active steps to deal with it. So what we're doing is that we're making sure that we're considering what might be changing. You know, we don't just keep going for the original end goal for the sake of it, because circumstances have changed. Now, this is a really simple slide, but it belies the challenges underneath. The most common one, which always surprises me, is that organisations don't have any kind of rigour and regularity in their hunt for factors that might be changing. So they decide internally what their values are, what their goals are, what their strategic direction is. But they don't have that regular challenge of what else has changed. They don't have that regular hunt going on. It might be part of the board agenda, but it's actually not sort of happening in lots of different areas of the organisation. And there's no sort of funneling up of where people have noticed a change in perhaps how customers behave, and funneling that up to the real decision makers to actually consider, do we need to shift our end goals? I'll give you an example from my own life, which is that over the last 10 months, one of the things I've noticed is that if I'm providing training courses, as opposed to pre-COVID, those training courses I used to do on site. I mean, you know that I'm often helping organisations lead lots of big change initiatives, and I do lots of workshops, but formal training courses used to be 2 days, you know, in the classroom, or there's the big change management practitioner, which would be 5 days in the classroom. And that's how my world was. Now, what's happened is that customers have changed what they want from me. They still want me to provide those qualifications, but for many corporate bodies, they can't do the 2 full days because it just, their remote working really doesn't respond well to that. So I'm chunking things up into sort of 2 or 3 hour sessions and delivering them over a number of weeks. Now, that's the kind of change that I've experienced in the front line in response to my customers. Now, if I was part of a big organisation, it would be making sure that we funneled that up to the executive leadership to really get them aware that actually what's wanted by customers is actually starting to shift and change, and maybe their end goal as a result of that input needs to amend and change as well. So I find it really interesting that organisations struggle to put some kind of process, some funneling process in place where that kind of information can be easily sort of taken up to the decision makers. But equally, I find it interesting that the decision makers are not necessarily open to what is changing, and they don't actually want to do what's on this diagram. They don't want to, I mean, not massively pivot away from where they were going, but to slightly shift the perspective, to slightly shift the emphasis and the priorities, to maybe include things that they hadn't originally wanted to include, or to exclude things that are no longer appearing as relevant. So it's about, there's an open-mindedness, and one of the things that I find interesting from a leadership perspective is that that open-mindedness requires a level of courage. So agility, and in this change perspective, I think there are 3 things I've chosen to highlight tonight. I could talk for weeks on this subject, but I think it's about making sure that we are bringing together the worlds of project and change. That I think it's really important that we have that incremental nature so that we deliver as early as we possibly can. And I think it's really important that we do a lot of flexibility as well. Now, the reason I'm bothering to summarise these points is that I'm hoping that what you are doing right now is, I would like you to share your views, and there's hundreds of you on this call, But what I'd like you to do is to put in the question function is just, I'd like you to identify what you think the benefits of an agile change approach are. Now, the reason I'm inviting you to share your thoughts is not just because I want this to be interactive, but I genuinely want to hear your views, because I think that there's a lot of things that you'll raise that are relevant to your world, and I will probably agree with all of them. But the other reason that I'm asking you to sort of raise these benefits is because as project and change professionals, we are likely to be the ones that are going to have to almost justify, I'm sorry to use that word, but certainly explain what an agile change approach is. It's obviously the common sense approach to a world that is so uncertain. It's a common sense approach to the fact that the end goals do need to change and flex, that we do need to deliver as early as possible because the patience of our customer base has shortened over the years, and that there's so much sort of else out in the marketplace that we need to frequently get in front of them with new ideas, so that technology keeps changing and we keep needing to respond to it. So agile change is a very common sense approach to the factors that really govern the third decade of this 21st century. We have never been in a position where there is so much change. And again, with a client this afternoon, I was just saying, you know, we're using agile change to respond to the fact that there is far more ambition than there is resource to carry it out. And that what we're going to look at in this webinar is the importance of prioritizing and choosing, making choices about what comes first. So I think it's really important that you guys are able to sort of start to think for yourselves, actually, this is quite sensible. I like it because I think it has a benefit because. So you can replay some of my words back to me if you want, or you can put other ideas out there, but I'd really like to hear what you have to say. Is anybody putting anything in the questions or comments?
Yeah, they're all coming through now, Mel. I'll
okay,
try
so what I'm going to do, I'm going to just move on to this slide here. So what I did last time, I did this on the last webinar and you guys told me you loved it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically capture your thoughts. So I am going to be the stenographer, and Mark is just going to, he has the really difficult job of skimming through everything and trying to pull out the comments. And I did warn him that he'd have to work really hard. So I've got no real sympathy. So off you go, Mark. Tell me whatever you want to say.
Right. So a bunch of these together. So can see results and quick wins, seeing change happen quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that idea of can see the results, because I think we are in a results-driven, achievement-driven, evidence-based world now, and being able to tell somebody that I'm busy is not quite as impactful as saying I've done something. There's something ready for use. People have started working in a new way. It's a far more impactful conversation, isn't it? Yeah. So what else have you got, Mark?
Continuous delivering.
And doesn't that build up confidence? The fact is that you haven't just had one little success, but it's not, and in fact, what I'm going to do is bring that onto the same line as quick wins, because I think it's quick wins and continuous delivery, continuous quick wins, I think, because we can create momentum from that. I do think that there's a momentum to success, if you like, and that really does build motivation. So I get quite excited by that. Be nice if I could spell the word motivation, but there we go. We'll keep going on that. What else we got then, Mark?
So there's quite a lot. You probably won't be surprised with the words adapt and pivot in them. So if I just take two in particular, so the ability to pivot if required based on organizational needs.
Yeah, so based on organizational needs, I think one of the things that does is it makes us more responsive, doesn't it? And I think it is about having that sort of a process, that rigor for asking what is changing, but based on organizational needs, it makes us responsive. And if we're responsive, I think what that does, it makes us relevant. So it makes the changes relevant, rather than being seen as a you know, just spending money for the sake of spending money. We can actually say, well, no, we pivot and we adapt to changing needs, and we're always meeting your needs. So I think it makes the worlds of project and change a far more compelling offering. What else we got?
Yep. So it's kind of similar on that, but the ability to adapt to unforeseen things. Chief example being COVID.
And unforeseen. Yeah, because none of us are we have a crystal ball, so for unforeseen needs as well. Yeah. Okay. What else?
Ability to fail quickly. I like that one.
You didn't read my LinkedIn post then the other day, did you? I said that I wanted to replace the words fail fast to I'm going to put the opposite of this, which is succeed quickly. It wasn't my words, by the way. I think it was in a PMI report, but I absolutely loved it, because I know that in the boardroom I do not use the word fail. It's a career limiting word, so I tend to avoid it. Far better to talk about succeed quickly than fail fast. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, what else we got?
So quicker ROI, and seeing benefits sooner, builds confidence in the business that you can deliver, i.e. seeing is believing.
Builds confidence. I love seeing is believing. Thank you. That's a great phrase. Oh, I like that. Steal that.
There's a couple of really good analogies in here as well, but trying to keep on top.
Yeah, you can copy me the chat function later, and what I'll do, guys, is I'll read through all of it, and I'll start to share some of those comments through LinkedIn. I know a lot of you are LinkedIn with me, so if you're not, please do connect with me, and I'll share some of those thoughts. So I'll do a little write-up of this webinar, because I always find it really interesting. Can I just say that on the quicker return on investment, this is a I think it's maybe a marketing perspective. It's certainly a view that what happens is we turn from a cost base to a profit center. And I think there's always something in there, isn't there, about I've worked in this space for 3 decades, and I'm the one who's spending the money and making, upsetting business as usual by making change happen. So the earlier we do get that return on investment, the more likely I am to be seen in, shall we say, on the good side of everything, by the one who's bringing in the money, either by increasing revenue or reducing costs. But suddenly I'm on the right side of the argument. Suddenly the finance director doesn't hate me anymore. I'm seen as something useful in life. So I think there's something very strong in that one. And got a couple more, Mark?
Yeah, there's a few around. It encourages innovation.
Oh, yes.
And constantly learning and refining to get the best possible solution.
Which takes us into that space, doesn't it, around being a learning organisation. I can't remember the first textbook I read on that, but I think it was in the early 1980s. And there is something here about, I'm going to go into my specialty of neuroscience at this moment and talk about the fact that actually where we feel a sense of achievement is on the journey, not on the destination. So the fact that we've got this iterative incremental approach, which means that we keep learning, we keep developing, that actually means that we've got almost a constant stream of motivation, because we're constantly developing things, and that makes us feel that, oh great, there's another achievement, I've learned something new, I'm better than I was before. And actually from the brain's perspective, that keeps us very well motivated. Yeah, what's the next one?
Well, I'll share the analogy. I've got to share this one. So the analogy that in an agile change world, we are dolphins always coming up for air. In a non-agile world, we're more like whales underwater for longer.
Okay, rather than whales who stay underwater longer. I love that.
It's a couple of visibility, effective collaboration.
Yeah, I think I'm going to get, don't worry, and effective collaboration. Yeah, collaboration is the key thing, isn't it? Because if collaboration is I think it's the opposite of being arrogant, because collaboration is about, tapping into others' expertise. And I think it's the opposite of arrogantly assuming I know the answers. And I think that can make a very compelling working environment. I'm more open that way. Very difficult to talk and type, by the way, and get things right. But there we go. Opposite. We'll go with opposite, shall we? We'll go with visibility. And you've got one more. So I'm clearly running out of space.
Yep. Someone says easier to run BAU at the same time.
Ooh, okay. That's a contentious point, that running business as usual at the same time. Some people would say yes, because changes are smaller and therefore and less disruptive, and others would say no, there is this constant change. So I think we might touch on that in just a moment, so we'll have a look at that. And last one then.
Creates more ownership in the business.
Yeah, and the reason we care about that is that change only happens if those impacted get involved. So if there is no ownership, then we've got a real problem, because actually we're doing it to them and they're not picking up and running with it. So actually, yeah, where are we going to go with that? We're just standing on the sidelines shouting, you should work differently, rather than people picking up and running with it. Kind of enjoyed that. It was really good fun. Okay, right, so let's have a look then at if we're getting to grips with agile change. I wanted to draw to your attention some of the key skills that I see out there, and behaviours that we need to adopt. I think the first is that we have to have a sort of courage of living with uncertainty. I think this is instead of gathering all the requirements up front and creating that complete plan, and showing how they're going to be delivered. I mean, that looks and feels very comforting, actually, because if I can draw the journey from end to end, it looks like I'm sort of totally in charge of what I'm doing, and that sort of gives out a certain confidence. But of course, the opposite of what we do in terms of change, instead of gathering all the requirements up front and creating that complete plan, what we do is we concentrate on the most valuable changes. And once those are up and running, we move on to the next most valuable piece of work. And it does take courage, because it looks like we don't really know where we don't know the whole story. But what it means is, of course, that we are being authentic. We're not promising certainty when there isn't any. Because you've probably heard on some of these webinars, I've said on the Gantt chart, if I knit together a Gantt chart of all the requirements on something we've never done before, that's truly experimental, then it's actually a bunch of lies. The further out I go, the bigger the lie I'm telling, because I'm guessing how long it's going to take. I'm guessing that I've captured every activity that's needed, and I'm going to be proven wrong quite a few times. So by drawing this up front, I'm actually sort of, at best it's a fantasy, it's a hope that this is how things are going to run. But we pretty much know that within a few weeks we'll be discovering new things, and our plans will have to be replanned and replanned and replanned again. Whereas with Agile, we just don't buy into that lie. What we say is, we've got an idea of where we're heading, but what we think is that we should do these things first, see what difference they make, and then we'll get on and plan the next thing that we think will make the greatest difference. And of course, in that way, not only are we not promising an artificial certainty, but we're not closing out the possibility for innovation either, which I think is really important. But this takes courage. And this is why I got you trying to articulate the benefits, because I think this is where that courage starts. Because the top diagram looks like people are in control, and that's what we're up against. So I think you have to be ready to articulate there is a different way, and it comes with a lot of benefits. I think something else is the courage about knowing where you need to get to. And it should be obvious, but it isn't, is it? We have to take an idea and sort of say, right, okay, what's the bigger picture that we're trying to get to? We need to move people away from this idea of articulating every single requirement. I want this, I want that. Oh, it should be able to do that. It's like kids in a sweet shop when we do that. Instead, what we want is a far more considered approach, which is this. Ultimately, what does good look like? What are we trying to get to here? What should we be able to do in the future that we can't do now? No, don't tell me how we're going to do it in the future. Let's just concentrate for a moment. So holding people in that creative space which says, no, don't worry about the how, don't worry about the mechanics of it. Let's just debate for a moment what we think our organisation should be able to do. And perhaps in this conversation, we should talk about, are there things that we should retire from doing, things that we should stop doing? There are certain products that don't bring in as much revenue anymore. I had a horrible conversation over the weekend with the CEO and a finance director, which was about retiring out of markets where customers simply were not profitable. The problem, the reason it was such an uncomfortable conversation, is that in this wider end goal of where we were moving the business to, we would be leaving behind some customers who were actually charitable. They were charity themselves, and we were behaving very charitably towards them because we were providing an awful lot of services that we weren't charging them full market rate, and ultimately we were losing money. And I said, that's fine. They are not in the new picture of who you are targeting as your customer and who is your target market. That doesn't mean to say we need to be uncharitable, but what I want to do is call out our charitable activities and say, right, that is part of our corporate social responsibility and it sits over there and we are funding it differently, but let's not muddle it up. But of course, this whole idea of end goals are actually full of uncomfortable conversations, because I've got to try to work out what that end goal looks like. And we know already that that end goal is likely to shift. It shifts in shape, so we need to pivot slightly towards it. And again, it shifts in shape and we need to pivot. So I've already said that we need some kind of horizon scanning process. But as I just described, we need to have these difficult conversations, because what I'm asking people to do is step into a future world and look around and go, well, this is what we do now. So it might be that it's in terms of products and services. It might be not exactly how we do it, but the bigger picture of what parts of the business do we want to automate? Where do we think we might be using people? Where do we think we might be using machines or robotic process automation or artificial intelligence? Are we happy with the relationships we have in our marketplace? Do we want to develop deeper partnership style relationships with other organizations? Do we want to maybe push things offshore? Do we want to change any aspect of our supply chain? What does good look like is the constant question that sort of underpins all of this, that I'm constantly pushing people towards. And it's a difficult one, because I'm sort of asking them to try to imagine what's the end goal here. But with the caveat, and this is what I like about Agile change, is I'm saying you don't need to get it perfect first time. Right, we're going to have a conversation about what you think that end goal is, and it looks like this blue shape here. But actually, don't worry, if you haven't said everything or you haven't had all the best ideas right now, at least we've got some kind of direction from you, some kind of destination where we know where we're heading, but we also know that that might flex in some way over time. And I do think that this, therefore, the Agile in Agile change actually provides us with an inbuilt safety net for some very difficult conversations about what that end goal looks like. So I think that's an important skill to be able to facilitate, and you add real value when you ask these difficult questions. I think the other thing which we need to sort of think about is that macro to micro is harder than micro to macro. What on earth am I on about? Well, if I sort of say, okay, how are we going to do, what are we going to change? And what I get is people go, oh, we should be able to do that, and, oh, we should have that, and oh, it's got to look like that, and oh, we need to include that. If I get that sort of requirements led change, it's micro. We build up so little pieces, and what we do is we pull them all together, don't we, until we get the bigger picture. That's micro to macro, and it's actually how the brain works. Because if I ask you, you know, if you're going to do a task like maybe tidy your room, tidy the house, you're going to start to say, oh, we need to put these things in boxes, we need to tidy all the shelves, we need to put all of those, get those things washed. We will come out, because we're human, with activities, all of those micro activities that lead to the macro picture, which is we'll have a tidy room. But if instead I ask you to say, now hang on, you want a tidy room, what does that mean to you? Is that clean, or is that decluttered? Is the furniture organized differently? So I start to get you to think about the macro picture. What I'm getting you to focus in on is a definite, this is the end goal I really want, rather than the accidental end goal, which is the product of lots of little requirements all jammed together. So if I step back now and think about, I want a tidy room, I actually think, do you know what? I want an uncluttered space. And that means reorganizing the furniture, taking some furniture out. So it's not just about a bit of a tidy up. And therefore, what I'm doing is trying to create that macro picture, that end goal. And then what I'm going to do, because we're always pressed for time, is I'm looking to then decompose that into individual outcomes that would be valuable. So maybe the first outcome is to take out a couple of pieces of furniture that aren't used that much. If I get stopped in my tracks by something else, then I still would have delivered that early return on investment of my time. I would have made a difference by at least decluttering a little bit. I didn't get to do moving the other furniture around. I did not get to emptying the drawers and getting rid of some of the all the things on the tops of the tables and having a tidy up. I didn't get to do all of those other outcomes, but at least I got the first outcome done. And it is all about, I know I've given you a very simple example, but you can see the value in picking those outcomes. But the key skill is being able to take people into that space that says, okay, what's this ideal macro picture, rather than ending up with an accidental end goal. The accident is that it's a product of having added together all of the little ideas, but it wasn't a deliberate decision. And therefore, it might not be quite the right decision. It might not add quite the right value. And I think that's a really important piece. And what, you know, if you can get that first level of breakdown done, then this next level of breakdown makes more sense. So we then break each outcome into new ways of working, and then we break each new way of working into, you know, its individual tasks. But really, I think the skill set is that we can do that first level of breakdown, and that's what makes a big difference. And then finally, I think one of the things I'm always interested in is how the brain likes to save energy, and the brain's got lots of shortcuts to do that. But one of the issues is, why are we finding, you know, why do we find change so hard? It's because actually our brains don't like having to constantly make decisions. And one of the things that we're trying to make a decision on is what we've just looked at, is that having got that breakdown of outcomes, we have to decide, well, which one will we do first, and which one comes next, and which one after that. And that means that I have to take that decision based on business value. So of course, I'm having to look at all of the benefits and the advantages and the improvements that each outcome will deliver, and then make a decision on, so we'll go with this one first. But when I get to the end and I've delivered that outcome, I have got an idea of what the next one should be, but I have to go back and revisit that decision because the world might have changed. So I have to go back and decide whether or not, based on new information, we've got the right thing, or do we have to change the order of things? So having sort of worked in a Prince 2 world many, many years ago, this traditional project management style, and having worked in an agile space for over 10 years, the one thing I still remember is how ever on, if you like, however present I need to be, in that we only ever get a few weeks into doing something before we ask ourselves the question, now that we've done that thing, what should we do next? There's a constancy to the decision making. that is needed in Agile to make sure we're always doing the next most valuable thing. And that decision making, as we know, many of us work with people who are experts at procrastinating. So I have to spend quite a lot of time persuading people to take a decision. I provide them with all of the information, all the data that enables them to decide, if you like, the Moscow prioritization. What is a must-have? What is a should-have? What is a could-have? And what is a won't-have this time? But actually, I find that I have to spend a lot of time encouraging them to make those decisions, because it feels to them like, oh, we'll leave it till later, till we've got more information. That procrastination is a risk-averse approach. My job is to explain to them the risk of not making a decision. So what I do is I show them the impact if we do go ahead with creating this outcome, but I also show them the impact if they prevaricate and they hold back on taking the decision. I show them the impact that this team over here can't do any work because they're still waiting to hear from you. And this supplier over here is going to charge us additional fees because we aren't fulfilling our side of the contract because we haven't taken a decision. So I spend a lot of time trying to almost, it's not teach decision making, because leaders understand how to take decisions, but it's having the courage to take that decision. And decision making means you select one thing over something else. So what you do is when you select one thing, what they're scared of is closing out the possibilities of other things. And we have to help people get through that. I think it's one of the big issues. So I think there's that exhaustion of constant decision making that we need to be aware of. And then finally, picking up on the point that was raised by somebody saying it's actually easier to get BAU done. Well, I think this diagram sort of shares some of the concerns that people have with this more agile approach. With the more traditional view, we do all of the activities and we only go live once when we've got every single aspect of our project finished, and then we go live, and that's when we deal with the change activities. Whereas in this agile approach on the right hand side, we have the initial idea and that leads to some change, the next most valuable idea, that leads to some change, and then the next one, etc., etc. So we do have far more frequent change. And some people are concerned that that volume of change makes people feel as if they haven't got time to sort of find their feet. They're on shifting sands all of the time because things are changing all of the time. And it is certainly a conversation I have a lot of sympathy with. I was surprised by a client before Christmas who said when we were looking at this diagram and people were talking about a concern over change fatigue, that he said there is no such thing as change fatigue. If in your private life you're making lots of changes, you don't get tired, do you? It's because you're totally motivated to make those changes because you're deciding to make them. So this guy said, no, there is nothing like change fatigue. Change fatigue is just the fact that we haven't motivated people properly. I thought was definitely an interesting perspective and worth sharing. My own approach to dealing with multiple changes like this, so that people do not feel that they are so much on shifting sands, is how I try to tell a story about all of the changes that are coming up, so that people don't feel knocked sideways all the time by something unexpected. What I'm trying to do is get that message across that, you know, I'm currently sort of, that change is currently working, and there's another one coming and then another one. So I think there's something in here about we have to address the danger of too much change. However, I will say one thing, because this has occurred to me recently on something I'm working on, that I think the release of incremental changes here on the right hand side actually matches our pace of understanding. I'm working on a project that's going to be 3 years in duration. It's a major systems and equipment upgrade for an organisation, and announcing these changes before Christmas, it was really interesting to staff were obviously in shock and trying to understand what it meant for their jobs. And one of the things I could say to them is that I've made them a promise, basically, is that the emotions that we're currently experiencing they might pass through, like shock and denial and anger, and finally acceptance of the changes, will actually going to be repeated. The reason they're going to be repeated frequently is that as they learn more, and as more details of the changes released to them, they'll think more about how their roles will change, and they'll go back psychologically through that change again. Because basically the fog keeps lifting, doesn't it? And we keep making peace with the latest information that we've discovered about the change. And I have made a promise to them that as they are psychologically going through those multiple change curves, I'm going to match that with, I'm going to give them as early as possible, real tangible change for them to engage with. So whenever I can release new equipment to them, whenever I can do a demonstration of a new system capability, whenever I can give them early insight into the new ways of working that the organisation is bringing on over the next few years, I will do that, because I think it will match the pace of their psychological sort of multiple changes they're going to go through. And that's gone down a storm. So I think we have to be aware that there's multiple changes, but that it's not always a disaster when we do that. So this is what I think. I think that we need to learn about agile change, because I think there's many reasons, but it gives us the early realization of benefits, creates real value, it creates momentum, it creates motivation. And this early delivery and the frequent delivery allows for frequent validation that we're sort of on the right path, and that we're doing the right things, and that our assumptions are correct, and that therefore each wave of change that we create gives us a chance to get feedback and drives decisions on what the next delivery should be, not based on potentially incorrect assumptions, but based on real up-to-date understanding of what's happening. And I think that by putting things into operational use, we are giving people the choice of what to change next based on the evidence of what we've just changed. So they're using those results of earlier deliveries to drive those later prioritization decisions. So it's actually much more evidence-based decision making. It's less risky. And I think this evolving solution, of course, reflects our changing priorities. So looking at the time, what I was going to do was go back and get you to have another go at this, what are the benefits of agile change? But I think we've captured a lot of those. And I hope I've given you food for thought to carry on with that idea of finding out what you think the benefits are. So what I'm going to do is use the last 10 minutes or so to turn it over to Mark and pose me any questions that you want to.
Yeah, thanks, Mel. Great stuff. There's actually quite a lot to talk, because we're talking a lot about the benefits. And there was a couple of questions around, if we talk, can we sort of even it out and talk about some of the potential disadvantages? So might be good to address a couple of those. So I'll start with there's a couple that point to the risk of burnout with the volume of change when it's agile, and it could overwhelm.
Well, yeah, and I think if I just go back to this last diagram, I think that I am very sympathetic to that. And I think that, however, whilst it is a risk, I think that if we're not careful, we'll end up playing the game of King Canute, who tried to sit on his throne and push and tell the waves not to roll onto the sand. I'm afraid the waves keep coming. It's tidal. There's nothing we can do about it. So I think that how we ameliorate that risk is that we spend time trying to make the impact of multiple continuous change as copable as possible. And in fact, one of the reasons I founded the continuous change community, and it was named that way, is that a lot of what we discuss on those panels is coping strategies. And I think that is something that we shouldn't be ignorant of, that as part of our change role now, we have to, and I'm finding this absolutely in my practice, that I have to pull in much more almost psychological understanding, neuroscientific understanding of how the brain works to create meaningful coping strategies. So maybe what I'm saying is that we have to open up the scope of change management to include not just all the implementation activities, but a much greater emphasis on emotional coping strategies. I'm sure a lot of us already have those in our change plans, but now we're expanding them even more.
Thanks, Mel. A couple of people asking, can you give some examples of when Agile might not be the best approach or most appropriate methodology?
Oh, good. Well, I'm on the slide. I'm the right slide for it. On the left-hand side here, if I know exactly what I'm doing, and there's no choice about it, the requirements are so obvious, then do absolutely use a traditional approach. Because if the Agile approach is really set up for uncertainty. We've never done this before, and we don't know how it's going to be received. We don't know exactly what we're doing, so let's take it in tiny little steps and move forward on that basis. And I think it's really interesting that therefore Agile is not just a simple answer. It does come with costs. I think there are two costs of the diagram on the right hand side, other than the frequent change that we've just talked about. And I think the first one is that it's the cost of feedback. At the end of every sort of idea being created, I am going to put it into operational use, and I'm sourcing feedback. What do people think? Tell us what your experiences are. And that feedback doesn't come for free. When I'm asking people to share their experiences, share their results, I'm taking them away from their business as usual role while they're doing it. So feedback is not cost free, and there's a lot more feedback to drive our decisions in Agile. And the second thing is that I often find there are diseconomies of scale, because as I move on to the second idea, I might have to unpick some of the things that I've done already so that I can sort of expand it and make it more available to a wider customer base, perhaps, or include other things in it. So I find that I sort of have to maybe unpick a little bit of the work I've previously done so that I can sort of it's ready to sort of go to a wider audience. And again, that unpicking and having to redo some of the work doesn't come for free either. So there are diseconomies of scale, and there is the cost of feedback in an Agile approach. So if you haven't got uncertainty, if you don't need feedback, if you don't need to consider how the experience is and whether or not there are other things we should add, then just go straight for the traditional approach. When I moved house a couple of months ago, I have moved house quite a few times. So I was able to draw up the requirements list. I knew of all the things that needed to be done, all of the communications with all of the utilities, the communications with the estate agent, with the lawyers. I knew exactly what was required in terms of there are, packing up a room, which is, packing up all the clothes, all of the ornaments, all of the books, taking things to the charity shop that we don't want anymore. You can make that list up, can't you? And you can create a plan where you work out the logical order of those things. I don't need to keep stopping and going, have we got any other ideas about how we'd like to make this packing happen? Or are there any other things that you'd like me to expand on? Now, I don't need feedback, and I don't need to keep iterating through. I just need the job done. So a traditional approach is the most cost effective in those circumstances where there's no uncertainty and there's no experimentation needed.
Thanks, Mel. Here's next one. What method or tool do you use to capture and communicate change impacts when there are layer after layer of them in multiple Agile sprints?
Okay, the most important thing I do is I don't try to centrally control it. The most important thing I do is I build a change agent network or change champion network who are on the ground doing the impact assessment with their colleagues and picking up all of the little impacts and managing them themselves. I think that there is a great deal to be lost if you try to overly control impact assessment, because I suppose it's my take on impact assessment. I do want to understand what the impact is, but I don't just want to leave it at that. I want us to then tackle the impact. Does that impact require us to provide some coaching or training? Does that impact require us to provide maybe a test environment that people can practice in? Do we need to do more explanations of what's going on? So I want to not just address the impact, just identify the impact, but also address it. And I have found that the most important thing when there are layers and layers through the organization is that that impact is driven down through those layers by representatives at each of those layers. So that's my take on it.
Thanks, Hope. I had the next question, now I've lost it. How do you deal, or have you come across teams that say they are agile organisations but really are not, and how do you address that?
Absolutely. I meet a lot of teams that tell me they're agile because they are having a daily scrum or a daily sprint meeting or whatever you might want to call it, and that they're working in sort of 2-week sprints. So they are sort of finishing work every couple of weeks. But when I ask the bigger questions, which is, and I think this is probably the easiest way to look at it, which is that are they working from macro to micro rather than working micro upwards, you find that they're not actually agile at all. And I think this for me is the fundamental piece of it, is that actually they are delivering, they think they're delivering incrementally because they're doing little bits and pieces, but they are not doing it from a more sort of considered response of actually we know the overall end goal we're trying to get to, and we have chosen the things that make the biggest business difference, the biggest value, if you like. So they're not doing this, the heavy lifting of agile thinking. They're not doing that, but what they've got is a few agile ceremonies. And then I just work with them to sort of get across how we might do this.
Great, thanks, Hope. I think one final question before we start to wrap up. So how do you contract against changing end goals and changing requirements with Agile?
I think that the Agile Business Consortium are actually running a webinar on this, which is because ultimately what you're saying is that if we're going to, and I'll just go to I think one of the early slides this way here, which is that what I could do at the top diagram there is obviously contract for every single thing that I might want from my supplier. But what I'm doing in an agile approach is I'm effectively saying, right, I want to cut a contract for the whole end goal, but we're going to have some flexibility between us here. And there's going to have to be a lot of trust between us, because I'm absolutely going to purchase all the things I need for this first increment or iteration. So to create the first outcome, and then I'm going to come back to you for the second outcome. But you're absolutely right. I'm going to do this as a call-off contract because I'm not paying for everything up front. So there has to be a huge amount of trust. Possibly think of it as the opposite to the contract between the EU and AstraZeneca. And that's maybe what you're aiming for, because I've never seen a contract less trusted in my life than what I'm seeing right now with that one. Hope that helps. I'm just going to tidy up and go to the end. We've done the questions. Here, further information. I will say, for those of you who are asking me, I can see on LinkedIn right now, that yes, I am doing some courses myself. I'm doing one in the UK or European time zone on 17th and 18th of February. And then in March, I'm doing one coming up on the 11th and 12th of March in the US and Canada time zone, which means that I finish around 1 o'clock in the morning. So I don't do those very often, but I do them through the change management review. Teresa sets it all up, but it does mean that I have to stay up late, and I'm a morning person. So I make a big sacrifice about once a quarter to do that. But actually, if you don't want me to stay up in the middle of the night, you can take the self-paced online learning. I've cut it into lots of sort of 10-minute modules with lots of activities and exercises, so you can do it at your own pace. And if you're homeschooling, you might very well want to do that option. But I hope that helps. Join the tribe that have taken the Agile Change Agent qualification from APMG, and just listen to the stuff they're saying about how relevant, how practical, and how many skills and techniques they've learned that have made a difference. So I'm really proud to be the chief examiner for that qualification.
Excellent, great stuff, Mel. Thanks for that. You've covered the further info slide for me perfectly. So that just leaves me to wrap up. So I would like to thank everyone very much for attending. I do hope you found it valuable and informative, and many thanks as ever to you, Melanie, for your insights and expertise, and thanks everyone for sending in the questions. And sorry we couldn't get to them all in the hour, but we hope we've answered a few good ones for you. And just a reminder as well that I made the point at the start, but I know often that people join a few minutes late, so we have recorded this session, and we will be sending out a follow-up email tomorrow morning. And Mel's been kind enough to put a supporting paper together as well, which really is a really good summary of what we've discussed on the webinar today. So do look out for that in tomorrow morning UK time. So thanks again, everyone. Thanks again, Mel. We hope to see you again on future APMG webinars. Stay safe and enjoy the rest of your week and the weekend ahead. Bye-bye.
Capture the chat for me, please, Mark, and I will do some articles in LinkedIn over the next couple of weeks. I'll try and do something over the weekend. And thank you for the 45 people who've already contacted me in LinkedIn. That's quite a lot. Have a good evening or afternoon, depending on where you are.
Yeah. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.